Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the cradle of civilization itself, Mesopotamia, where the first sparks of human ingenuity flickered to life in a land hugged by two restless rivers. Picture yourself standing on a sun-scorched plain, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wild barley. In every direction, the horizon shimmers with heat, and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers carve lazy, glittering paths through the dust. You're not just anywhere, this is the Fertile Crescent, the OG of human progress, where people decided to stop wandering and plant roots, literally and figuratively. The ground beneath your feet is practically humming with potential, but fair warning, surviving here means outsmarting floods, droughts, and the occasional grumpy neighbor with a spear. You probably won't survive this, but let's give it a shot anyway. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. Are you chilling in New York at midnight or sipping coffee in Tokyo at breakfast? Let me know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in what's now southern Iraq, around 10,000 BCE, and the world feels raw. The air's heavy with possibility, like the moment before a storm. Around you, small bands of hunter-gatherers are doing their thing, spearing fish, picking berries, and probably arguing over who gets the best cave. But something's shifting. You notice a few folks kneeling in the dirt, poking seeds into the soil with sticks. They're not just hoping for a snack, they're betting their future on it. This is the Neolithic Revolution, the mainstream historical fact that flipped the script on human existence. People figured out how to domesticate plants like wheat and barley, and suddenly, wandering for food wasn't the only gig in town. Staying put meant more food, more people, and, yep, more problems. You wander through one of these early settlements. Let's call it a proto-village. Mud huts huddled together, their walls cracked from the sun. The people here are scrappy, with calloused hands and sun-browned skin. They're not just growing crops, they're taming goats and sheep, which, by the way, smell about as charming as you'd expect. You overhear a couple of farmers grumbling about the river flooding their fields again. One of them, with a beard that's seen better days, mutters something about offering a goat to the river god to calm it down. That's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians often blamed natural disasters on cranky deities and thought a well-timed sacrifice could fix things. Spoiler alert, it didn't always work.
You keep walking and the village feels alive. Kids chase each other, dodging piles of drying grain. A woman kneads dough on a flat stone, her hands moving like she's done this 1,000 times. The air smells of smoke and baked bread, with a faint tang of river mud. You're tempted to grab a loaf, but the locals don't look like they're in a sharing mood. These folks are pioneers, even if they don't know it. By settling down, they're creating surplus food, which means not everyone has to farm. Some can specialize, make tools, weave baskets, or, invent civilization. But historians still argue whether this shift to farming was a choice or a necessity. Did people want to settle, or did climate changes force their hand? No one's got a time machine to check, so the debate rages on. Now let's zoom out a bit. You're hovering over the Fertile Crescent, a crescent-shaped strip of land stretching from modern-day Egypt up through Syria and down into Iraq. It's called fertile for a reason. The soil here is rich, fed by river silt, and the climate's just right for growing crops. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You notice the rivers are unpredictable, sometimes swelling over their banks, sometimes drying to a trickle. The people below you are learning to adapt, digging ditches to channel water to their fields. It's backbreaking work, and you're glad you're just a ghostly observer. One guy, wiping sweat from his brow, looks up and squints, like he can almost see you. Don't just stand there. Grab a shovel. Yeah, hard pass. As you drift through the settlement, you see the seeds of something bigger. These aren't just random huts anymore. They're starting to cluster, forming what'll become the first cities. You spot a guy carving a clay tablet, maybe keeping track of how much grain he's got stored. That's a big deal. Record keeping is about to change everything. But for now, it's just him, scratching lines in the mud, probably cursing when his stylus slips. You can't help but chuckle. Imagine inventing accounting and thinking it's a good idea. Jokes aside, this is the spark of bureaucracy, and it's going to make empires possible.
You pause by a fire pit where a group's gathered, passing around a clay cup of something that smells suspiciously like beer. Yep, Mesopotamians were brewing way back then, and it wasn't just for fun, it was a social glue. You overhear them swapping stories about a massive flood that wiped out a neighbor's crops last year. One woman, her voice low and dramatic, claims the gods sent it because someone forgot to offer them a proper gift. You roll your eyes, but the others nod seriously. Belief in divine wrath was as real to them as gravity is to you. It's kind of wild to think they're laying the groundwork for the world's first cities while worrying about angry sky gods. You wander toward the edge of the village, where the fields give way to wild reeds. The sun's dipping low, painting the sky in pinks and oranges. A kid runs past, chasing a stray goat, and you can't help but smile. Life here is tough, but it's vibrant. These people are inventing agriculture, sure, but they're also inventing community, trade, and the idea that tomorrow might be better than today. You feel a breeze, carrying the scent of river water and blooming wildflowers. It's peaceful, but you know it won't last. Mesopotamia's story is just getting started, and it's about to get a lot messier. Before you drift off, let's linger here a moment. You're watching the first farmers, the ones who decided to bet on the land instead of the hunt. They're not perfect. Half the time they're probably arguing over whose turn it is to clean the irrigation ditch. But they're building something new, something that'll echo through history. You glance at the river, its surface catching the last of the sunlight. It's beautiful, but you know it's also a beast that'll flood their fields if they're not careful. That's Mesopotamia in a nutshell, beauty and chaos, side by side. And you're right in the middle of it.
You're back in Mesopotamia, standing ankle-deep in the silty banks of the Tigris River, the water cool against your skin as it swirls around reeds and the occasional curious fish. The sun's high, baking the earth into a cracked clay mosaic, and you can smell the sharp tang of wet mud mixed with something faintly sweet, maybe wild herbs growing nearby. Last time you saw the first farmers betting their lives on seeds and stubbornness, building villages that spark civilization. Now you're about to see how they turned two wild rivers into their lifeline. Spoiler, it's not all smooth sailing, and if you think modern plumbing's a hassle, wait till you see what these folks are dealing with. You're in the heart of the Fertile Crescent, around 6000 BCE, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are both a blessing and a curse. These rivers are the arteries of Mesopotamia, pumping life into the land, but also throwing tantrums, flooding fields one day, drying up the next. You watch a group of farmers, their tunics stained with sweat and dirt, digging a trench with crude tools made of wood and flint. They're not just messing around, this is irrigation, the mainstream historical fact that made Mesopotamian agriculture possible. By channeling river water to their fields, they're growing enough crops to feed growing villages, maybe even a surplus to trade. It's like they've hacked the landscape, turning a flood-prone plain into a breadbasket. You crouch near one of the ditches, watching water trickle through, sluggish but steady. A farmer with a face like weathered leather notices you, or at least he squints in your direction, probably wondering why you're not helping. Lazy ghost, or so you imagine. You grin because honestly, digging in this heat looks miserable. These irrigation systems are no joke. Networks of canals, ditches and reservoirs that require constant maintenance. One wrong move and the river could drown their crops or leave them high and dry. You spot a kid,
maybe 10, hauling a basket of mud to reinforce a canal wall. Child labour? Yeah, it's a thing here, but nobody's calling HR. Everyone pitches in, because survival's a team sport. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some Mesopotamians believed the rivers were alive, like giant serpents with moods. They'd toss offerings, grain, fish, even the odd clay figurine, into the water to appease the river gods.
Do you see a woman by the bank, whispering something as she drops a small clay fish into the current? Does it work? Probably not, but it's a reminder that these people are navigating a world where nature feels personal and unpredictable. You can't help but respect the hustle, even if it's a bit superstitious by your standards. You wander along the canal, the water reflecting the sky like a shaky mirror. The fields around you are patchwork, green barley, golden wheat, and patches of sesame. The air's alive with the hum of insects and the distant chatter of farmers. But it's not all perfect. You overhear two men arguing about water rights, their voices rising over who gets to divert the canal first. One guy's waving a stick like it's a scepter, claiming his field's more important. Historians still argue whether these early water disputes sparked the first laws or just a lot of shouting matches. Either way, you can see the seeds of politics sprouting alongside the crops. Let's take a step back. You're hovering above the plain now, the rivers stretching like silver ribbons across the land. The Tigris is faster, wilder, cutting deep channels through the earth, while the Euphrates meanders, almost lazy. Together they make this region fertile, but they're also a logistical nightmare. You notice small dams made of reeds and mud, clever but fragile. One good flood could wipe them out, and you're pretty sure the farmers know it. You spot a group reinforcing a levee, their hands caked with mud. One guy slips, lands in the ditch, and his buddies laugh. Okay, maybe ancient humour isn't that different from yours. As you drift closer, you see how irrigation isn't just about water, it's about power. The guy who controls the canal controls the harvest, and you're starting to get why those water rights arguments get heated. You pass a village elder, his beard streaked with grey, directing workers like he's conducting an orchestra. He's probably the one deciding who gets water and when. You're tempted to ask him how he deals with the complainers, but, ghost problems. Instead, you notice his staff, carved with weird symbols, maybe an early tally of water allocations. It's a reminder of that clay tablet you saw last time, the one with scratches for grain counts. These people are getting organised, and it's kind of impressive. You pause by a field where a woman's planting seeds, her movements precise, almost rhythmic. She's singing something low and melodic, maybe a work song or a prayer for a good harvest. You don't speak Sumerian, but the tune's catchy, and you're half tempted to hum along. The soil here is rich, almost black, thanks to the river silt. It's like nature's fertilizer, and these farmers know it. They're not just growing food, they're growing a future. But you can't shake the feeling that it's precarious. One bad flood, one dry season, and this whole operation could crumble. You glance at the river, its surface deceptively calm. It's a sleeping giant, and everyone here knows it. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Imagine if these farmers had a Yelp for rivers. Tigris, 1 star, keeps flooding my crops, but great for fishing. You chuckle, but the reality's tougher. These people are inventing engineering on the fly, with no blueprints or YouTube tutorials. You see them experiment, digging deeper channels, building higher levees, even using reeds to stabilize the banks. Some ideas work, others wash away in the next flood. You spot a collapsed canal, its walls slumped like a failed cake. A farmer nearby just shakes his head, already grabbing his shovel. Resilience is their superpower, and you're starting to admire it. You wander toward a small settlement nearby, where the irrigation system feeds a cluster of mud brick houses. The air smells of baking bread and something earthy, maybe drying flax.
You notice a kid drawing in the dirt with a stick, sketching what looks like a canal. Future engineer, maybe, or just bored. Either way, this place feels alive, buzzing with people who are rewriting what it means to be human. They're not just surviving, they're shaping the land to their will. You glance back at the river, its waters catching the late afternoon light. It's beautiful, but you know it's a partner they can't fully trust. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the fields, you feel the weight of what's happening here. These canals aren't just ditches, they're the veins of a civilization taking its first breaths. You're standing at the edge of history, watching people wrestle with nature and somehow win, at least for now. The woman planting seeds finishes her row, wipes her brow, and looks out at the river. You wonder what she's thinking. Hope for a good harvest, or worry about the next flood? Either way, she's part of something bigger, and so are you, just by being here.
You're still in Mesopotamia, the sun beating down on your neck as you stand on a dusty rise overlooking a sprawling settlement, bigger than the villages you saw before. The Tigris glints in the distance, its waters tamed by the canals you explored last time, snaking through fields like lifelines. The air hums with activity, shouts, the clink of tools, the low bleat of goats. Mud brick houses cluster tighter here, their flat roofs baking under the midday heat, and the faint smell of smoke and roasted barley drifts toward you. You're witnessing the birth of city-states, where people aren't just surviving, but organizing, arguing, and building something that feels permanent. It's messy, ambitious, and honestly, a little chaotic, like a group project where nobody agrees on the plan. You're in southern Mesopotamia, around 4000 BCE, and these settlements are growing into something new. City-states like Uruk and Eridu, each a little kingdom with its own rules and swagger. The mainstream historical fact here is that these were among the world's first urban centers, where people centralized power, trade, and religion in one place. You wander through Uruk's narrow streets, dodging a cart piled high with reeds. The driver, a wiry guy with a sunburned nose, yells something you don't catch, probably not a compliment. The streets are a maze, lined with houses so close you can hear neighbors bickering through the walls. It's like an ancient soap opera, and you're hooked. You pause by a marketplace where stalls overflow with goods, grain, pottery, woven mats. A merchant haggles with a woman over a basket of dates, waving his hands like he's conducting a symphony. You notice a clay token on the ground, stamped with a wedge-shaped mark. That's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians used these tokens as early accounting tools, tracking goods before writing was a thing. Imagine dropping your grocery list and someone 6,000 years later picking it up. Wild, right? These tokens are proof that city life demanded organization, and these folks were all over it. The city's pulse is strong, but it's not all harmony. You overhear two men arguing near a temple, their voices sharp over who controls the grain stores. One's got a fancy amulet, maybe a priest. The other's got dirt under his nails, probably a farmer. Power's shifting here, and not everyone's happy about it.
Historians still argue whether these city-states grew from cooperation or competition. Did people unite for mutual gain, or did some clever folks storm off, clutching their amulet like it's a lifeline? Politics, even back then, was a contact sport. You keep moving, drawn to a massive structure looming over the city, a ziggurat. Though it's still half-built, its mud brick terraces rising like a giant staircase to nowhere. Workers haul bricks up ramps, their backs glistening with sweat. You're tempted to cheer them on, but they're too focused to notice a ghostly spectator. This ziggurat's a temple, a place to cozy up to the gods, and it's the heart of the city-state. Religion isn't just spiritual here, it's political. The priests who run this place aren't just praying, they're managing grain, settling disputes, and probably skimming a little off the top. You smirk, because some things never change. Let's lighten the mood with a joke. Imagine a Mesopotamian city planner. Let's build a city. Step 1, don't anger the river gods. Step 2, oops, too late. You chuckle, but the stakes are real. These cities need order to function, and you see it taking shape. You pass a guy scratching marks on a clay tablet, maybe a tax record or a contract. He's muttering to himself, probably cursing his stylus for smudging. This is bureaucracy's baby steps, and it's not pretty, but it's keeping the city from collapsing into chaos. You're starting to get why Uruk's a big deal. It's not just bigger, it's smarter. You wander toward the city's edge, where fields stretch out, fed by those canals you saw last time. Remember that muddy kid drawing canals in the dirt? This place feels like his dream grown up, organized, bustling, but still precarious. You spot a group of elders sitting under a palm tree, debating something with lots of hand gestures. They're probably deciding who gets water or how to split the harvest. Leadership here isn't just one guy barking orders, it's a mix of priests, landowners, and whoever's loudest. You're glad you don't have to vote. Picking sides in this crowd looks exhausting.
The air's thick with dust and the scent of drying fish. You pass a potter shaping clay on a wheel, her hands steady despite the heat. She's making jars for storing grain, and you realize how much thought goes into keeping a city fed. Surplus food means not everyone's farming. Some can be potters, weavers, or even full-time priests. You glance back at the ziggurat, its shadow stretching over the houses. It's a reminder that belief holds this place together as much as canals do. The gods are always watching, or so the locals think, and you're not about to argue with a priest holding a ceremonial dagger. You drift through a quieter street, where kids play a game with pebbles, tossing them into a chalked-out grid. It's cute, but you notice their parents nearby, repairing a wall damaged by a recent flood. The rivers, your old friends from last time, are still calling the shots. You can almost hear the tigress chuckling in the distance, like it knows it's in charge. The city's growing, but it's still at nature's mercy. You wonder how long they can keep this balancing act going, building bigger, organizing better, praying harder. As the sun starts to dip, painting the sky in streaks of orange, you linger by a small shrine. A woman lights a clay lamp, its flicker casting shadows on a carved stone figure. She's praying for something. Maybe a good harvest. Maybe a sick kid. You don't know, but it feels personal. This city's not just about power or grain. It's about people trying to make sense of a world that's bigger than them. You glance at the ziggurat, its silhouette sharp against the sunset. It's a symbol of ambition, but also a reminder that even city-states answer to something higher, whether it's gods or just the rivers. Let's take one last look. You're floating above Uruk now. Its streets a patchwork of life. Merchants shouting, workers hauling, kids laughing. It's messy, loud, and alive. These city-states are experiments, the first stabs at what it means to live together in one place. They're not perfect. Half the time they're probably one bad flood away from disaster. But they're trying, and that's what makes it mesmerizing. You feel the evening breeze, carrying the scent of river water and warm clay. This is Mesopotamia at its boldest, and you're right here for it.
You're still in the bustling heart of Mesopotamia, around 3500 BCE, standing in the shadow of Uruk's half-built ziggurat from last time, its mud brick terraces glowing under the relentless sun. The air's thick with dust and the faint sweetness of ripening dates, mingling with the earthy smell of freshly turned soil. You hear the creak of a wooden wheel turning nearby, and it's not just any wheel, it's the Sumerian kind, a game changer that's about to roll through history.
You're in the thick of the Sumerian age now, where the people of southern Mesopotamia are inventing stuff so groundbreaking it'll make your head spin. Think of it as the Silicon Valley of the ancient world, but with more mud and fewer coffee shops. You wander toward the sound of that creaking wheel, dodging a herd of goats that definitely don't care about your personal space. A cart rolls by, its solid wooden wheels grinding against the dirt. This is the mainstream historical fact. The Sumerians invented the wheel, one of humanity's biggest leaps, around this time. It's not the fancy spoked version you're picturing. These are clunky, heavy discs, but they're hauling grain and goods like nobody's business. You watch a merchant load his cart with clay jars, muttering about a delivery to a nearby village. The wheel's making trade faster, cities richer, and this guy's life just a tad easier, until it gets stuck in the mud anyway. You follow the cart's path, weaving through Uruk's crowded streets. The city's alive, a chaotic symphony of shouts, laughter, and the clatter of tools. You spot a scribe sitting cross-legged in the shade, scratching wedge-shaped marks onto a damp clay tablet. That's cuneiform, another Sumerian brainchild, and it's not just for show, it's the world's first writing system, though we'll dive deeper into that next time. For now, you're struck by how these people are problem solvers. Wheels, writing, irrigation canals, remember those muddy ditches from section 2? They're not just surviving, they're building a world where ideas stick around longer than the people who dream them up. Here's your quirky tidbit. Sumerians loved their beer so much, they had a goddess for it, Ninkasi, and even wrote a hymn that's basically a recipe for brewing. You pass a small brewery where a woman stirs a bubbling vat of barley mash, the air heavy with a sour, yeasty smell. She's probably chanting to Ninkasi under her breath, hoping for a good batch.
Beer's not just a drink here, it's currency, a social glue, and maybe even a way to keep the gods happy. You're tempted to ask for a sip, but the look on her face says she's not sharing. Fair enough, brewing serious business. You keep moving, the city's energy pulling you along. The Sumerians aren't just inventing things, they're inventing systems. You see a potter shaping a jar on a wheel, not the cart kind, but a spinning disc that's another Sumerian first. His hands move like they're dancing, turning wet clay into something useful and beautiful. Nearby, a metalworker hammers a copper blade, the clank echoing like a heartbeat. These specialized jobs are only possible because of that surplus food from the fields you saw earlier. Not everyone's farming anymore, and that's freeing up brain power for stuff like this, tools, art, and ideas that'll outlast the hands making them. But it's not all smooth clay and shiny copper. You overhear a heated argument near a temple where two merchants are waving clay tablets at each other, probably disputing a trade deal. One guy's pointing at the tablet like it's proof he's right, but the other's not buying it. Historians still argue whether Sumerian inventions like writing and the wheel spread through trade or were copied by neighbors who saw a good thing and ran with it. You watch the merchants storm off, still shouting, and you can't help but grin. Drama's universal, even in 3500 BCE. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Sumerian wheel break? Because it was tired of carrying the weight of civilization. Okay, maybe not their best invention. Humor's still a work in progress. You wander toward a quieter corner of Uruk, where a group of kids are playing with clay tokens, rolling them like dice. They're probably mimicking the adults who use those tokens to track goods, like the one you saw in the marketplace last time. It's cute, but it's also a sign of how deep organization runs here. These kids are growing up in a world where counting, measuring, and recording aren't just chores, they're the backbone of a city.
You pause by a canal, its water reflecting the late afternoon sky. The irrigation system, another Sumerian hit, is keeping the fields green and the city fed. You spot a farmer checking a sluice gate, his face creased with worry. One bad flood and all this progress could wash away. You're starting to see the Sumerians' secret sauce. They're not just clever, they're relentless. Every invention, the wheel, the potter's wheel, those early scribbles on clay, is a bet on a better future, even if the rivers and gods don't always play nice. You drift toward a temple, its walls carved with images of lions and barley stalks. Inside, priests are chanting, their voices low and rhythmic, like an ancient ASMR session. They're offering grain to Inanna, the goddess of love and war, which is a combo that makes you raise an eyebrow. The temple's not just a church, it's a bank, a courthouse, and a community center rolled into one. The Sumerians are weaving religion into everything, trade, law, even their beer recipe. You're tempted to whisper, "Keep it chill, Inanna," but you don't want to risk divine wrath, even as a ghost. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the city, you feel the weight of what's happening. The Sumerians are inventing the future, one wheel, one clay tablet at a time. You see a scribe teaching a young boy to press a stylus into clay, his hands guiding the kid's shaky attempts. It's a small moment, but it's huge. This kid might grow up to write laws, stories, or even a complaint about his neighbor's goats. You glance at the cart from earlier, now parked by a house, its wheels still caked with mud. It's a reminder that progress is messy, but it's moving. You linger by the canal, the water's surface catching the last golden light. The air's cooler now, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming reeds. Uruk still buzzing, but it's softer, like the city's catching its breath. You're catching yours too, marveling at how these people are rewriting what's possible. They're not just building tools, they're building a world where ideas can roll as far as those creaky wheels. And you're right here, watching it unfold, feeling like you're part of something massive.
You're still in Uruk, around 3500 BCE, standing in a shaded courtyard where the air smells of damp clay and the faint tang of reeds. The city's hum surrounds you, merchants haggling, kids laughing, and the distant creak of a Sumerian wheel still rolling from last time. You're drawn to a scribe, hunched over a clay tablet, his stylus pressing wedge-shaped marks into the soft surface. This isn't just doodling, it's cuneiform, the world's first writing system, and you're about to see how it turned Mesopotamia into a place where ideas could stick around forever. It's like the internet of the ancient world, but slower and with more smudged clay. You lean closer, watching the scribe's hands move with precision, each wedge a deliberate choice. The mainstream historical fact is that cuneiform, developed by the Sumerians, was the first true writing system, used to record everything from grain tallies to epic poems. It's not an alphabet, think more like a mix of symbols and syllables scratched into clay that's dried or baked to last. The scribe mutters something, maybe cursing a wobbly wedge, and you can't help but sympathize. Writing's hard enough with a keyboard, try doing it with a stick in wet mud. This tablet's probably a list of barley deliveries, but it's proof that Mesopotamia's getting organized, big time. You wander through the city, noticing clay tablets everywhere, stacked in a merchant's stall, tucked under a priest's arm, even lying broken in the dust. Writing's not just for the elite, it's spreading, changing how people think. You see a young boy practicing on a scrap of clay, copying his teacher's marks. He's terrible at it, and you stifle a laugh as he groans and starts over. Here's your quirky tidbit. Sumerians sometimes recycled their tablets by soaking them in water to smooth out the clay and start fresh. Ancient Control-Z, basically. You spot a pile of soggy tablets by a canal, waiting to be reborn as someone's grocery list or love letter. The streets are alive, buzzing with the energy of a city that's figuring itself out. You pass a marketplace where a trader's showing off a tablet with cuneiform marks to seal a deal. It's like watching the birth of paperwork, and you're not sure whether to be impressed or horrified. Writings making trade smoother, disputes rarer, and priests richer. Those temple records aren't just prayers, they're ledgers. You overhear two men arguing over a tablet's meaning, one jabbing a finger at the wedges like they've personally offended him. Historians still argue whether cuneiform spread because of trade or because neighbouring cultures saw it and thought, we need that. Either way, it's a game changer. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Sumerian scribe quit? Too many wedge issues with his boss. You chuckle, but the reality's intense. Writing's not just practical, it's power. Whoever controls the tablets controls the story. Whether it's how much grain you owe or what the gods supposedly want. You drift toward a temple, its walls carved with scenes of offerings and starry skies. Inside, a priestess is reading a tablet aloud, her voice soft but commanding. She's recording a festival plan, maybe for Inanna, that goddess of love and war you met last time. The crowd listens, hanging on her words, and you realize writing's giving her a kind of immortality. Her words will outlive her, baked into clay. You keep moving, drawn to a quieter street where a scribe school's in session. A dozen kids sit in the dust, scratching at tablets under the watchful eye of a teacher who looks like he's one bad wedge away from losing it. The kids are learning to write numbers, lists, maybe even a line of poetry if they're lucky. You notice one boy sneaking a doodle of a fish instead of copying his sums. You grin. Some things, like slacking off in class, never change. But these kids are part of something huge. Writing's letting the Sumerians store knowledge, pass it down, and build on it. It's like they've cracked the code for progress. You pause by a canal, its water reflecting the afternoon sun like a cracked mirror. Remember those irrigation ditches from Section 2? They're still here, feeding the fields that make this city possible. Writing's tied to that too. Tablets track water allocations, crop yields, and who's slacking on canal maintenance. You see a farmer hand a tablet to an official, probably settling a debt. The official nods, tucks the tablet under his arm, and you're struck by how normal this feels. Writing's already woven into daily life, like it's always been here. But you know it's brand new, a spark that's about to set the ancient world on fire.
The air's warm, carrying the scent of baked bread and river mud. You wander past a house where a woman's sealing a tablet with a cylinder seal, rolling it like a tiny rolling pin to leave her mark, a snarling lion, maybe her family's emblem. It's a signature, a way to say, "This is mine." You're tempted to ask her about it, but she's focused, her brow furrowed. These seals are art and identity, another Sumerian trick to make life more secure. You're starting to see how cuneiform isn't just about words, it's about trust, proof, and making sure your neighbour doesn't borrow your barley and forget to pay you back. Let's take a step back. You're hovering above Uruk now, the city sprawling like a living thing. The ziggurat from Section 3 looms in the distance, its terraces catching the golden light. Tablets are everywhere, tying this place together. Trade, religion, law. You spot a courier running through the streets, clutching a tablet like it's a ticking time bomb. Maybe it's a message to another city-state, proof that writing's already connecting places beyond Uruk's walls. You feel a breeze, carrying the faint hum of the city, voices, tools, life. It's messy, but it's working, and writing's the glue holding it together. As the sun dips lower, you linger by the temple, where the priestess from earlier is still chanting, her tablet now tucked away. The crowd's dispersing, heading home to flat-roofed houses where they'll eat, argue, and maybe write a little more. You glance at the canal, its water catching the last rays of light. Writing's changed everything. It's not just about recording grain, it's about recording dreams, laws, and stories.
You're standing at the edge of history, watching the Sumerians etch their mark on the world, one wedge at a time. And you're right here, feeling the weight of every scratch. You're back in Uruk, around 3500 BCE, standing in a dusty alley where the air smells of warm bread, sweat, and the faint musk of livestock. The city's alive, its pulse beating through crowded streets and the distant murmur of a temple chant. You're not here to gawk at ziggurats or cuneiform tablets this time, though those scratches from last section are still fresh in your mind. Now you're diving into the daily grind of ordinary Mesopotamians, the folks who keep this place humming. Picture yourself as a fly on the wall, or maybe a ghostly neighbour, peeking into lives that are equal parts grit, hustle, and surprising charm. It's not glamorous, but it's real, and you're about to get a front row seat to what makes this place tick.
You start at dawn, the sky blushing pink over mud brick houses, packed so tight you can hear someone snoring through the walls. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian daily life revolved around agriculture and trade, with most people working the fields or small crafts to support the growing city-states. You follow a farmer trudging toward the fields, his sandals slapping against the dirt. He's carrying a hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use. The fields are just outside Uruk, fed by those canals you saw in Section 2, their waters glinting like liquid silver. He's checking his barley crop, muttering about a dry spell. You can feel his worry. His family's survival depends on this harvest. You wander closer, noticing his hands, calloused and stained with earth. He's not alone. Others are out here, men and women bent over rows of wheat and sesame. A woman nearby pauses to wipe sweat from her brow, her tunic patched but clean. She's singing softly, a tune that feels like it's keeping her going. You're tempted to hum along, but you don't know the words, and honestly, you'd probably scare her. Life here is labor-intensive, no question. Most folks are up before dawn, working until the sun's too brutal to handle. You see kids helping too, hauling water or chasing stray goats. It's a family affair, and nobody's sitting this one out. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians used crocodile dung as a contraceptive, mixed into a paste and applied, well, you can guess where. You overhear two women chatting by a canal, one giggling about her recipe her mother swore by. You wince, grateful for modern medicine, but it's a reminder that these people were creative, even if their solutions sound like a bad idea now. They're experimenting with life, from crops to cures, and not all of it works. You spot a clay jar nearby, probably filled with some other dubious remedy. Better you than me, you think, moving on. You head back to the city, where the streets are waking up. A potter's spinning his wheel. Remember that invention from Section 4? Shaping a jar with hands that move like they're dancing. Nearby are weavers threading flax into cloth, her loom clacking rhythmically. These aren't just jobs, they're lifelines. The surplus food from the fields lets people specialize, and you're seeing the results. Pots, clothes, tools. But it's not all rosy. You overhear a merchant griping about taxes paid in grain to the temple. He's waving a cuneiform tablet, probably a receipt, and you remember those wedge-shaped marks from last time. Taxes aren't new, and neither is complaining about them. You start at dawn, the sky blushing pink over mud brick houses packed so tight you can hear someone snoring through the walls. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian daily life revolved around agriculture and trade, with most people working the fields or small crafts to support the growing city-states. You follow a farmer trudging toward the fields, his sandals slapping against the dirt. He's carrying a hoe, its wooden handle worn smooth from years of use.
The fields are just outside Uruk, fed by those canals you saw in section 2, their waters glinting like liquid silver. He's checking his barley crop, muttering about a dry spell. You can feel his worry. His family's survival depends on this harvest. You wander closer, noticing his hands calloused and stained with earth. He's not alone. Others are out here, men and women, bent over rows of wheat and sesame. A woman nearby pauses to wipe sweat from her brow, her tunic patched but clean. She's singing softly, a tune that feels like it's keeping her going. You're tempted to hum along, but you don't know the words, and honestly, you'd probably scare her. Life here is labor-intensive, no question. Most folks are up before dawn, working until the sun's too brutal to handle. You see kids helping too, hauling water or chasing stray goats. It's a family affair, and nobody's sitting this one out. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians used crocodile dung as a contraceptive, mixed into a paste and applied, well, you can guess where. You overhear two women chatting by a canal, one giggling about a recipe her mother swore by. You wince, grateful for modern medicine, but it's a reminder that these people were creative, even if their solutions sound like a bad idea now. They're experimenting with life, from crops to cures, and not all of it works. You spot a clay jar nearby, probably filled with some other dubious remedy. Better you than me, you think, moving on. You head back to the city, where the streets are waking up. A potter's spinning his wheel. Remember that invention from section 4, shaping a jar with hands that move like they're dancing. Nearby, a weaver's threading flax into cloth, her loom clacking rhythmically. These aren't just jobs, they're lifelines. The surplus food from the fields lets people specialize, and you're seeing the results. Pots, clothes, tools. But it's not all rosy. You overhear a merchant gripping about taxes, paid in grain to the temple. He's waving a cuneiform tablet, probably a receipt, and you remember those wedge-shaped marks from last time. Taxes aren't new, and neither is complaining about them.
Let's lighten the mood with a joke. Why don't Mesopotamians play hide and seek? Because their houses are too small and the goats always give you away. You chuckle, but space is tight here. Houses are cramped mud brick boxes with flat roofs where families sleep on hot nights. You peek into one, seeing a family eating flatbread and lentils, passing around a clay cup of beer. The kids are arguing over who gets the last date, and the mum's rolling her eyes. It's relatable, almost cozy, until you notice the lack of windows. Ventilation's a dream these folks don't have. You're glad you're just a ghostly visitor, not stuck in there during a heat wave. You keep moving, drawn to a marketplace where the air's thick with the scent of spices and drying fish. Merchants shout over each other, offering barley, wool, even copper tools. A woman's bartering for a basket of onions, her voice sharp as she haggles. You notice she's wearing a clay amulet shaped like a crescent moon, probably for luck or protection. Religion's woven into daily life. People pray to gods like Inanna, who you met in section 4, for everything from good crops to safe births. You see a small shrine nearby, a clay figurine surrounded by offerings of grain. It's a reminder that fear and hope are as much a part of life here as work. But life's not just work and prayer. You spot a group of men playing a game with knuckle bones, tossing them like dice and cheering when one lands a good roll. It's a rare break, and you can feel their joy, even if it's fleeting. Historians still argue whether daily life in Mesopotamia was more cooperative or cutthroat. Did people share resources to survive, or was it every family for themselves? You watch a neighbor lend a basket of grain to another, but there's a tense promise of repayment. Trust is earned here, and it's fragile, like those clay tablets you saw last time. You drift toward the city's edge, where a family's repairing their house, patching cracks with fresh mud. The dad's teaching his son how to mix it,
their hands caked in brown sludge. It's a small moment, but it's everything. Skills passing down, keeping the family afloat. You notice a tablet by the door, maybe a record of their grain stores. Those cuneiform scratches are everywhere now, tying life together. You're starting to see how daily routines, planting, crafting, trading, are the heartbeat of Uruk, pumping life into its streets and temples.
As the sun climbs higher, the heat's getting brutal, and you're glad you don't have to sweat. You linger by a canal, its water catching the light like a lazy mirror. Remember that crocodile dung paste? Yeah, you're still cringing. But these people are resilient, making do with what they've got. You see a woman washing clothes in the canal, her kids splashing nearby. It's ordinary, but it's also the foundation of everything. The fields, the crafts, the city itself. You feel the breeze, carrying the scent of river mud and blooming reeds. Life here is hard, but it's vibrant, and you're right in the middle of it. You're still in Uruk, around 3500 BCE, standing in the heart of a bustling marketplace where the air's thick with the scents of sesame oil, dried fish, and the faint sweetness of overripe dates. The streets hum with energy, merchants shouting, carts creaking, those Sumerian wheels still grinding along, and the chatter of deals being struck. You're here to follow the pulse of trade, the lifeblood of Mesopotamian cities, as goods and ideas flow in and out like the rivers you saw. It's a chaotic dance of barter and ambition, and you're about to see how these city-states turned into powerhouses of wealth and influence. Buckle up. It's a wild ride, and you're just a ghostly tag-along. You weave through the crowd, dodging a donkey laden with sacks of barley. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamia's trade networks, stretching from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia, fueled economic growth and cultural exchange in the ancient world. You watch a trader, his tunic stained with road dust, unload a bundle of cedar wood from far-off Lebanon. The smell's rich, almost spicy, a stark contrast to the muddy tang of Uruk's canals. He's haggling with a local, gesturing wildly at the wood like it's gold. And honestly, it kind of is. Cedar's rare here, and it's worth more than a cartload of grain. You linger by his stall, noticing a pile of lapis lazuli beads, their deep blue catching the sunlight. They're from Afghanistan, hundreds of miles away, proof the trade's not just local, it's long distance and big time. You see clay tokens and cuneiform tablets scattered around like ancient receipts. The trader's scribbling on one now, probably noting a deal for wool or copper. You're tempted to peek, but he's got a sharp eye and you don't want to spook him. Trade's making Uruk rich, but it's also making it connected, pulling in goods and ideas from places you'd need a map to find. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians sometimes used beer as a form of currency, trading jugs of it for goods or labor. You spot a brewer nearby, her hands sticky with barley mash, pouring frothy liquid into clay jars. She's swapping a jug for a basket of reeds, both parties nodding like it's the most normal thing in the world. You're half tempted to join the toast, but, ghost problems. Beer's not just a drink here, it's money, morale, and maybe a nod to that goddess Ninkasi from Section 4. You can almost hear her chuckling approvingly. You keep moving, drawn to a corner of the market where a foreign merchant's unpacking tin ingots, their dull gleam a stark contrast to the flashy lapis. Tin's a big deal. It's mixed with copper to make bronze, which makes better tools and weapons. You overhear a local smith haggling, his voice low but intense. Trade's not just about stuff, it's about power. The cities that control these routes control the game. But it's risky. Caravans face bandits, storms, and cranky donkeys. You spot a trader nursing a bruised arm, probably from a rough journey. Historians still argue whether trade unified Mesopotamia's city-states or pitted them against each other for control of routes. You watch two merchants glare across their stalls, and you're leaning toward the latter. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why was the Mesopotamian trader so stressed? Because his donkey kept demanding a better deal. You grin, but the stakes here are real. You wander past a stall piled with textiles, their colors vibrant, even in the dusty light. A woman's inspecting a wool cloak, running her fingers over the weave. She's probably from a nearby city-state, here to trade or maybe just shop. The market's a melting pot. People from Eridu, Lagash, even places you've never heard of, all swapping goods, stories, and the occasional shady deal. You're starting to see how trade's knitting these cities together, even if they bicker like siblings. You drift toward the city's edge, where a caravan's unloading by a canal. The water's sluggish, reflecting the midday sun like a tired mirror. Remember those irrigation ditches? They're still here, feeding the fields that produce the surplus grain traders are hauling to distant lands. You see a scribe recording the caravan's haul on a cuneiform tablet, his stylus moving fast. Those wedges are tracking everything: barley, wool, even that precious cedar. Writing's making trade smoother, letting merchants trust each other, or at least pretend to. You spot a broken tablet in the dirt, its wedges smudged, but still legible. It's a tiny piece of history, and you're tempted to pocket it, but, you know, ghost rules.
The air's warm, carrying the scent of river mud and roasted sesame. You pause by a stall where a man's trading obsidian blades, their edges sharp enough to make you wince. They're from Anatolia, another long haul, and they're worth a fortune here. You overhear him boast about his journey, dodging bandits and bribing local chiefs. It's a story as valuable as the blades, and the crowd's eating it up. Trade's not just goods, it's gossip, culture, even technology. Those wheels? They're rolling these caravans farther and faster, spreading Sumerian know-how like wildfire. You wander back to the market's heart, where a priest's inspecting a shipment of incense, his nose wrinkled like he's not impressed. Temples are big players in trade, hoarding wealth and doling it out to keep the city running. You see a cuneiform tablet nearby, sealed with a cylinder seal like the one a lion maybe, or a star. It's a contract, proof that trade's not just handshake deals anymore. You're struck by how organized this all is, even if it's chaotic to your eyes. The market's a living thing, pulsing with ambition, greed, and just enough trust to keep it from collapsing. As the sun starts to dip, casting long shadows over the stalls, you feel the market's rhythms slow. Merchants pack up, their voices quieter now, their deals done for the day. You linger by the canal, watching a boat unload reeds, its crew laughing over a shared jug of beer. Trade's the thread tying Uruk to the world, weaving a web of goods, ideas and stories. You glance at the lapis beads, still glinting in the fading light. They're from a mountain you'll never see, but they're here, in Uruk, because someone rolled a cart, sailed a boot, and trusted a tablet. And you're right here, watching it all connect. You're still in Uruk, around 3500 BCE, standing at the base of that massive ziggurat you glimpsed, its mud brick terraces towering like a staircase to the heavens. The air's heavy with the scent of baked earth and incense, drifting from a nearby shrine where priests chant in low, rhythmic tones. The city's alive around you, voices haggling in the marketplace, the creak of carts rolling by. But today, you're here to marvel at the artistic soul of Mesopotamia. These people aren't just farmers or traders, they're creators, pouring their dreams and fears into ziggurats, statues and seals that make your jaw drop. It's like walking through an ancient gallery, and you're about to get the full tour.
You start at the ziggurat, its sun-baked bricks glowing golden in the midday light. The mainstream historical fact is that ziggurats were monumental religious structures, central to Mesopotamian cities, blending architecture, faith, and power. This one's dedicated to Inanna, that love and war goddess. And it's not just a building, it's a statement. You watch workers haul bricks up a ramp, their muscles straining under the weight. Each terrace is wider than a football field, stacked like a giant wedding cake, and you're half tempted to climb it, but the priests up top look like they don't take kindly to tourists. The ziggurats not just for show, it's where the city meets the gods, and it's stunning. You wander closer, noticing the walls decorated with colourful clay cones, pressed into the mud to form mosaics, geometric patterns, lions, stars. It's like ancient pixel art, and you're impressed by the effort. Here's your quirky tidbit. Sumerians sometimes buried small figurines under their houses for protection, like magical security systems. You spot a worker tucking a tiny clay statue, a snarling demon maybe, into the foundation of a nearby building. It's supposed to ward off evil spirits, and you can't help but wonder if it works. Spoiler, it probably doesn't, but it's a cute try, and it shows how much these people believed in art's power to shape their world. You keep moving, drawn to a quieter corner, where a woman's rolling a cylinder seal across wet clay, leaving a tiny, intricate scene, a hunt maybe, or a banquet. Remember those seals? They're everywhere, doubling as art and ID. This one's got leaping antelopes, so detailed you can almost hear them gallop. You're struck by how small it is, yet how much it says about Uruk's wealth and skill. But not everyone agrees on what these seals mean. Historians still argue whether they were mainly for trade, status, or just showing off. You watch the woman smile at her work, and you're betting it's a bit of all three.
Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Sumerian artist quit? His ziggurat designs kept getting decaf. You chuckle, but the reality's intense. Art's a big deal here, tied to religion and power. You drift back toward the ziggurat where a festival's starting. Priests in elaborate robes carry statues of gods, their surfaces inlaid with lapis lazuli from those trade routes. The crowd's chanting, tossing flowers and grain, and you can feel the energy, like a rock concert but with more divine wrath. The statues are heavy, carried on poles, and you're glad you're not the one lugging them. Art's not just pretty here, it's sacred. You wander through the city, noticing art everywhere, on temple walls, in jewelry, even on the pottery stacked in the market. A woman's selling jars painted with swirling fish, probably inspired by the Tigris you saw. Each piece tells a story, whether it's a god's wrath or a good harvest. You pass a musician playing a lyre, its strings plucked to a haunting melody. The instruments carved with bull heads, because why not? Mesopotamians love their animal motifs, and you're starting to see why. Those bulls look fierce, like they could scare off a bad harvest or a nosy neighbor. You pause by a temple, its entrance flanked by two massive stone lions, their mouths open in silent roars. They're intimidating, but also beautiful, their manes carved with impossible detail. You overhear a priest explaining the lions to a group, saying they guard the temple from evil. It's a reminder of that buried figurine. Art here is practical, not just decorative. You're tempted to ask the priest if the lions ever get tired of standing there, but his stern face says he's not in the mood for jokes. Instead, you notice a cuneiform tablet nearby, maybe a record of the temple's art supplies. Those wedges are still tying everything together. As the sun dips, casting long shadows over the ziggurat, you feel the city's heartbeat. Art's not just a luxury, it's a language, speaking to gods, kings, and regular folks like that potter. You see a kid drawing in the dust, mimicking the mosaics on the ziggurat. He's terrible, but it's cute, and you realize art's not just for temples, it's for everyone. You glance at the canal nearby, its water catching the fading light. Remember that crocodile dung contraceptive? Yeah, you're still cringing, but it's a reminder that these people pour creativity into everything, from medicine to monuments.
You linger by the ziggurat, its terraces now glowing orange in the sunset. The festival's winding down, the crowd quieter, the priests packing away their statues. You feel the weight of what you've seen, art that's not just beautiful, but powerful, tying Uruk to its gods and its people to each other. The air's cooler now, carrying the scent of river reeds and smouldering incense. You're standing in a city that's painting, carving and building its way into history, and you're right here, soaking it all in. You're still in Uruk, around 3500 BCE, standing on a sun-warmed street where the air carries the faint scent of sesame oil and the distant clink of a metalworker's hammer. The ziggurat's shadow from last time looms nearby, a reminder of Mesopotamia's artistic flair. But today, you're diving into something different, their brainy side. The Sumerians aren't just building epic structures or trading shiny beads. They're puzzling out the universe, crunching numbers, and mixing potions that might just save a life, or not. You're about to see how they became the ancient world's nerds, inventing math, astronomy, and medicine that laid the groundwork for science as you know it. So grab your imaginary abacus, because things are about to get geeky. You start in a quiet corner of the city, where a scribe's hunched over a clay tablet, scratching numbers with his stylus. The mainstream historical fact is that the Sumerians developed one of the earliest known systems of mathematics, using a base 60 system that's still with us in things like minutes and seconds. You watch him draw wedges in groups, calculating something, maybe how much grain a temple needs for a festival. His system's not like yours. It's a mix of 10s and 60s, and you're glad you don't have to do the mental math. He mutters, erasing a wedge with his thumb, and you can't help but feel for him. Ancient accounting sounds like a headache. You wander closer, noticing his tablets covered in precise grids. These aren't just numbers, they're the roots of geometry, used to measure fields and plan those irrigation canals. You see another scribe nearby, sketching a circle divided into 360 degrees. Yep, that's a Sumerian idea too. They're not just counting sheep, they're mapping the world in ways that'll echo for millennia. You're tempted to whisper, "Nice work, Pythagoras' great-grandpa," but you don't want to mess up his focus. Instead, you notice the stars faintly visible in the twilight sky, and that's your cue to pivot. The Sumerians were obsessed with the heavens, and you're drawn to a temple rooftop where a priest is scanning the night sky, his eyes squinting at constellations. Here's your quirky tidbit. They believed the stars could predict everything from floods to wars, and priests doubled as astrologers, reading omens in the sky like it was a cosmic cuneiform tablet. He's pointing at a bright star, maybe serious, muttering about a coming harvest. You're skeptical, but to him it's as real as the Tigris. Their astronomy wasn't just mystical, it led to calendars that tracked seasons, helping farmers know when to plant. You glance at the stars, twinkling like they're in on the secret. You keep moving, slipping through Uruk streets to a healer's hut, where the air smells of herbs and something faintly sour, maybe a remedy gone wrong. Mesopotamian medicine was a mix of science and magic, and you watch the healer grind roots into a paste, chanting softly. She's treating a man with a fever, smearing the paste on his forehead. It's not exactly FDA approved, but it's their best shot. They knew about setting bones, stitching wounds, and using plants like myrrh for pain, but they also thought demons caused some illnesses. You wince as she hands the man a clay amulet to ward off evil spirits. Remember that crocodile dung paste? Yeah, their medical game's a mixed bag. You overhear two healers debating nearby, one insisting the fever's from a god's wrath, the other blaming bad water. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian medicine leaned more on observation or superstition. Did they learn by trial and error, or were they just guessing with extra prayers? You watch the patient sip a bitter-looking brew, grimacing but hopeful. Science here is raw, half-baked, but it's a start. You're impressed by their guts, if not their success rate. The healer's hut is cramped, lined with herbs and clay tablets listing remedies, those cuneiform wedges keeping knowledge alive. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Sumerian astronomer get fired? He kept blaming the moon for his bad math. You chuckle, but the stars above are no joke to these folks. You drift back to the temple rooftop, where the priest's now marking a tablet with star positions. He's building a map of the sky, and it's not far off from what modern astronomers use. They tracked planets, called them wandering stars, and their records helped later cultures, like the Babylonians, build better calendars. You're starting to see how their obsession with patterns in numbers and stars is wiring Uruk for progress.
You wander through the city, passing a school where kids are learning to count on clay tablets, their styluses wobbling. One boy's scratching a triangle, maybe figuring out a field's area. It's basic, but it's the seed of trigonometry, and you're quietly geeking out. These kids are growing up in a world where numbers aren't just tools, they're power. Temples use math to track offerings, merchants use it to settle trades, and farmers use it to measure water from those canals. You spot a broken tablet in the dust, its wedges spelling out a math problem. It's like finding Einstein's homework, and you're tempted to frame it. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river mud and blooming reeds. You pause by a canal, its water reflecting the stars like a shattered mirror. The healer from earlier passes by, carrying a basket of herbs, her face tired but determined. She's part of this web, math, astronomy, medicine, all tied together by those cuneiform tablets. You see a scribe teaching a kid to mark a tablet, his voice patient despite the boy's messy wedges. It's a reminder that knowledge here isn't just for priests or kings, it's spreading, changing how people see the world. As the night deepens, you linger on the rooftop, the priest still charting stars. The city's quieter now, its buzz softened to a hum. You feel the weight of what's happening. The Sumerians aren't just living, they're thinking, measuring, questioning. Their math solves practical problems, their astronomy tracks time, and their medicine, well, it tries. You glance at the canal, its water catching the moonlight. It's a small piece of a big puzzle, and you're right here, watching the pieces come together. One wedge, one star, one hopeful remedy at a time. You're still in Uruk, around 3500 BCE, standing in the flickering light of a temple courtyard, where the air smells of smouldering incense and the faint, earthy tang of clay. The ziggurat looms nearby, its terraces casting long shadows as the sun dips low. But you're not here for architecture today. You're diving into the wild, vivid world of Mesopotamian gods and myths, where deities like Inanna rule the skies, the earth, and pretty much everything else. These stories aren't just bedtime tales, they're the heartbeat of the city, shaping how people pray, work, and even argue. So settle in. Things are about to get divine, dramatic, and a little weird.
You're drawn to the temple, where a priestess is chanting, her voice rising over a crowd gathered around a clay altar. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian religion was polytheistic, with gods like Anu, Enlil, and Inanna controlling everything from storms to love, and temples were the epicenter of worship and society. The priestess holds a statue of Inanna, its lapis eyes glinting, probably from those trade routes. She's telling a story about Inanna stealing sacred knowledge from Enki, the god of wisdom, by getting him drunk. The crowd gasps, and you can't help but smirk. Divine bar fights sound like a party you'd crash. You linger, listening as the story unfolds. Inanna's cunning, bold, and a bit ruthless, which tracks for a goddess of love and war. The myths here aren't just entertainment, they're a way to explain the world, why rivers flood, why crops fail, or why your neighbor's luckier than you. You notice a man in the crowd clutching an amulet, maybe praying for Inanna's favor. Religion's personal here, woven into daily life like those cuneiform tablets. You're tempted to ask him what he's praying for, but his intense focus says he's not in the mood for ghostly small talk. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians believed in mischievous spirits called utuku, ghost-like troublemakers who could sneak into your house and make you sick or just mess with your day. You spot a woman outside the temple burying a tiny clay figurine, sound familiar? To keep these spirits at bay. She's muttering something about a headache she blames on an utuku. You're skeptical, but you glance over your shoulder, just in case. These myths shape how people live, from offerings to gods to dodging invisible pranksters. It's a world where the supernatural feels as real as the Tigris. You wander through Uruk's streets, noticing myths everywhere. A potter's painting a jar with a scene of a bull-headed god, maybe Enlil, chasing a storm. It's art, but it's also a prayer, a way to keep the gods happy. You overhear two men arguing about whether Inanna or Enlil's more powerful, their voices rising like they're debating sports teams. Historians still argue whether these myths unified Mesopotamian cities or fueled rivalries, as each city-state had its favorite god. You watch the men storm off, still bickering, and you're betting on rivalry. Gods here are like hometown heroes, and loyalty runs deep.
Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Inanna throw a party? Because she stole Enki's wine and his secrets. You chuckle, but the myths are serious business. You drift back to the temple, where the priestess is now offering grain to Inanna's statue. The crowd's quiet, reverent, as smoke curls from the altar. Temples aren't just for worship, they're banks, courts, and social hubs. Myths give them power. Stories of gods justify why priests get to call the shots. You see a cuneiform tablet nearby, maybe recording the offerings, those wedges tying faith to bureaucracy. You keep moving, drawn to a quieter street, where a storyteller's entertaining kids with a tale about Anu, the sky god, battling a dragon. The kids are eye-wide, tossing pebbles like they're fighting alongside him. The story's vivid. Anu hurls lightning, the dragon roars, and you're almost caught up in it yourself. Myths like this aren't just for kids. They're how Mesopotamians make sense of chaos, like those unpredictable rivers. You notice one kid clutching a clay amulet, maybe to fend off that utuku his mum warned him about. Beliefs everywhere, and it's shaping how these people face the world. You pause by a canal, its water catching the last light like a mirror. Remember those irrigation ditches? They're still here, feeding the fields that let Uruk worship its gods with surplus grain. Myths tie into that too. Stories of gods flooding the earth remind people to respect the rivers. You see a man toss a handful of barley into the water, an offering to keep the Tigris happy. It's a small act, but it's rooted in a story as old as the city. You're starting to see how myths aren't just tales, they're the glue holding Uruk together, from temples to fields. The air's cooler now, carrying the scent of river reeds and smouldering incense. You wander back toward the temple, where the crowd's thinning, the priestess packing away her statue. You spot a clay tablet with a myth scratched into it, maybe Inanna's latest adventure. Those wedges are preserving stories, just like they preserve grain tallies or trade deals. You're struck by how myths and practicality intertwine here, making life feel bigger, scarier, but also hopeful. You glance at the ziggurat, its silhouette sharp against the sunset. It's a bridge to the gods, built on stories that keep Uruk alive. As night falls, you linger by the canal, the stars reflecting like a nod to those astronomers. The city's quieter, but the myths linger, in the amulets, the offerings, the whispered prayers. You feel the weight of a world where gods and spirits are as real as the dust under your feet. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're survival, explaining the unexplainable and giving people a reason to keep going. You're right here, caught in the magic of it all, as Uruk's myths light up the night. You're still in Uruk, around 3000 BCE, standing in a bustling square where the air hums with the scent of warm clay and the distant bleat of goats. The ziggurat's shadow stretches nearby, a reminder of the gods you met last time. But today, you're stepping into a story that's bigger than any temple. A tale carved into clay, whispered around fires, and passed down through generations. You're about to follow the epic of Gilgamesh, Mesopotamia's greatest hero, whose quest for immortality is as raw and human as anything you've seen in this city. It's a wild ride through friendship, loss, and the kind of existential crisis that hits you at 3 a.m. So let's dive in. You're drawn to a storyteller in the square, his voice rising and falling like a song as a crowd gathers, kids and adults alike leaning in. The mainstream historical fact is that the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature, was written in cuneiform on clay tablets, telling the story of Gilgamesh, a semi-divine king of Uruk, and his quest for meaning. The storyteller's hands wave dramatically, describing Gilgamesh as a hulking figure, 2/3 god, 1/3 man, ruling Uruk with a mix of strength and arrogance. You glance around, half expecting to see the guy strutting through the streets, but it's just the usual chaos of merchants and carts. The story's gripping. You're hooked as the teller describes Gilgamesh meeting Enkidu, a wild man created by the gods to balance him out. They fight, they bond, they become brothers. You can almost see Enkidu, shaggy and fierce, wrestling Gilgamesh in this very square. The crowd cheers at the part where they team up to slay Humbaba, a monstrous guardian in a cedar forest. Maybe that same cedar you smelled in the market. The storyteller's voice drops low, mimicking Humbaba's roar, and a kid in the crowd squeals. You can't help but grin. This guy's got a knack for drama.
Here's your quirky tidbit. Some tablets of the epic include a dream where Gilgamesh sees a meteor fall, which he interprets as a sign of Enkidu's arrival. Mesopotamians took dreams seriously, believing they were messages from the gods, like those star omens. You overhear a woman nearby whisper to her friend about a dream she had last night, wondering if it means trouble. She's clutching an amulet, maybe to ward off bad vibes or those pesky Utuku spirits. Dreams, stories, myths, they're all tangled up here, shaping how people see their world. You keep listening, drawn deeper into the epic. The storyteller's at the part where Enkidu dies, struck down by the gods for their hubris. Gilgamesh's grief hits hard. He wails, refuses to bury his friend, and sets off to find eternal life. You feel the weight of it standing in Uruk's dusty streets, where life's fragile, despite the bustling markets and towering ziggurats. The crowd's quiet now, some wiping their eyes. Historians still argue whether the epic was just a story or a reflection of real Mesopotamian values. Did it teach people to accept mortality, or was it a king's propaganda to seem larger than life? You watch the storyteller pause, sipping water, and you're leaning toward the former. This feels too raw to just be PR. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Gilgamesh hate camping? Because Humbaba kept stealing his firewood. You chuckle, but the story's no laughing matter. You wander toward a scribe's stall, where a clay tablet lies half-finished, its wedges telling part of the epic. Those cuneiform marks are preserving Gilgamesh's story, making it immortal in a way he never could be. You're tempted to trace the wedges, but the scribe's glaring at a kid who got too close, so you keep your distance. Writing's not just for trade or taxes anymore. It's for heroes, gods, and the kind of heartbreak that sticks with you. You drift through the city, the epic still echoing in your mind. You pass a temple where priests are offering barley to Inanna, who makes a cameo in the story, rejecting Gilgamesh's advances and sending a divine bull to punish him. Typical Inanna move, you think, remembering her wild streak. The priests' chants feel like they're part of the story, tying the gods to Uruk's daily life. You see a man carving a cylinder seal, maybe like the ones showing Gilgamesh wrestling a lion. Art, myth, religion, it's all one big web here, and you're caught in it.
You pause by a canal, its water reflecting the fading light like a memory of those rivers. The epic mentions floods, a nod to the Tigris's temper, and you can almost hear Gilgamesh's voice in the ripples, searching for answers. You spot a kid nearby, acting out the Humbaba fight with a stick, roaring like a monster. It's cute, but it's also proof that this story's alive, passed down through voices and clay. You're struck by how human it is. Gilgamesh's fear of death, his love for Enkidu, his stubborn quest. It's like he's one of those farmers, wrestling with life's big questions. The air's cooling now, carrying the scent of river mud and blooming reeds. You wander back to the square, where the storyteller's wrapping up. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, accepting his mortality, but building walls to leave a legacy. You glance at the city's mud brick walls, wondering if they're the ones he built. The crowd's dispersing, some still murmuring about the story. You feel its weight, a tale that's not just about a king, but about what it means to be human. Those cuneiform tablets, those canals, those gods, they're all part of it, and you're right here, watching it resonate through Uruk's dusty streets. As night falls, you linger by the canal, the stars above twinkling like the ones Gilgamesh might have seen in his dreams. The city's quieter, but the epic lingers, carried in whispers, tablets, and the hearts of people who know life's fleeting. You're standing in a place where stories outlive kings, where a hero's grief feels as real as the dust under your feet. And you're part of it, caught in the timeless pull of a tale that's still echoing thousands of years later. You're still in Uruk, around 3000 BCE, weaving through a crowded street where the air smells of warm bread, river mud, and the faint tang of wool being dyed. The ziggurat silhouette looms in the distance, a nod to the gods and myths you explored last time, but today you're turning your gaze to a group often overlooked, the women of Mesopotamia. They're not just background characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh or temple chants, they're farmers, priestesses, traders, and sometimes even power players in this bustling city. You're about to step into their world, where they navigate a society that's both restrictive and surprisingly open. Get ready. It's a mix of grit, grace, and the occasional eye-roll-worthy moment.
You start in a sunlit courtyard, where a woman kneads dough on a flat stone, her hands moving with the rhythm of someone who's done this 1,000 times. The mainstream historical fact is that women in Mesopotamia could hold significant roles. Some were priestesses, scribes, or even property owners, though their status varied by city and class. This woman's probably a farmer's wife, her tunic patched but clean, keeping the household running while her husband's in the fields you saw. She's chatting with a neighbor, swapping tips on brewing beer. Remember that goddess Ninkazi? And you catch her sly grin as she brags about her latest batch. Women here aren't just cooking, they're crafting. You wander closer, noticing a clay amulet around her neck, shaped like a crescent moon, maybe for Inanna, the love and war goddess. Religion's a big part of her life. She might pray for a good harvest or a safe childbirth, risks that feel all too real in this world. You spot a younger woman nearby, weaving flax into cloth, her loom clacking steadily. She's skilled, her fingers quick, and you realize her work's feeding into those trade networks. Women's labor, whether spinning, brewing, or farming alongside men, keeps Uruk's economy humming. You're tempted to applaud, but she's too focused, and you're just a ghostly bystander. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Mesopotamian women used makeup made from crushed minerals and plants, like red ochre for lips or coal for eyes, to signal status or beauty. You pass a market stall where a woman's selling small pots of the stuff, her own eyes lined with dark coal that makes her look like she's ready to star in an ancient music video. She's haggling with a customer, her voice sharp but playful, and you can't help but admire her hustle. Makeup's not just vanity, it's a way to stand out in a city where appearances matter, especially for women navigating social ladders. You keep moving, drawn to a temple where a priestess is leading a ritual, her robes embroidered with patterns like those mosaics. She's high status, maybe an Entu, a priestess who wields real power, managing temple lands and offerings. Her voice carries over the crowd, chanting for Inanna, and you remember her role in the Epic of Gilgamesh, rejecting the hero's advances. Priestesses like this one could own property, write contracts, those cuneiform tablets, and even influence city decisions. But it's not all rosy. You overhear two men muttering about women meddling in temple affairs, and you roll your eyes. Historians still argue whether women's roles in Mesopotamia were empowered or tightly controlled by male-dominated systems. Watching the priestess command the crowd, you're leaning toward empowered, at least for some.
Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Mesopotamian woman start a brewery? Because she wanted to be the aleite of Uruk. You chuckle, but her work's no small feat. You drift back to the courtyard, where the first woman's now teaching her daughter to knead dough, their hands mirroring each other. It's a quiet moment, but it's vital. Skills like these keep families fed, markets stocked, and cities alive. You notice a clay tablet nearby, maybe a record of her beer sales, those wedges tying her work to the city's pulse. Women here aren't just supporting roles, they're threads in the fabric of Uruk. You wander toward the market, where a woman's trading wool for copper tools, her voice firm as she negotiates. She's no priestess, but she's holding her own, using those cylinder seals to mark her deals. You're struck by her confidence. She's not just trading, she's building a life. But you also see the limits. Most women can't own land unless they're widowed or high status, and laws favor men in disputes. You spot a widow arguing with a merchant over a debt, her face fierce despite the odds. She's clutching a tablet, maybe proof of her claim, and you're rooting for her, even if the system's not. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river reeds and baking clay. You pause by a canal, those lifelines, where women are washing clothes, their laughter mixing with the splash of water. They're gossiping about a local wedding, joking about the groom's bad beard. It's a slice of normalcy, but it's also survival. Clean clothes mean health, status, maybe even a better marriage match. You notice one woman wearing a lapis lazuli bead, a luxury from those trade routes. It's a small defiance of her daily grind, and you're quietly cheering her on. As the sun dips, casting golden light over the city, you linger by the temple. The priestess is finishing her ritual, offering barley to Inanna's statue. The crowd's thinning, but her presence lingers, a reminder that women here can be powerful, even in a world that doesn't always make it easy. You see the weaver from earlier, packing up her loom, her hands stained with dye. She's tired but proud, and you feel the weight of her contribution. Women like her, brewing, weaving, praying, trading, are Uruk's backbone, just as much as the ziggurat or those cuneiform tablets.
You drift back to the canal, the water reflecting the fading light like a memory of the Tigris. The city's settling into evening, its buzz softening. You're struck by the resilience of these women, navigating a world of gods, trade, and hard labor with skill and sass. They're not just in the background, they're shaping Uruk, one loaf, one prayer, one deal at a time. And you're right here, watching their stories unfold, as vital as any epic. You're still in Mesopotamia, but now you're in Akkad, around 2300 BCE, a few centuries past Uruk's bustling streets. The air's thick with dust and the sharp scent of sun-baked clay, and you're standing in a city that's pulsing with ambition. The ziggurats and cuneiform tablets from earlier sections are still around, but today you're diving into a new chapter, the rise of the Akkadian Empire under Sargon, the guy who took city-states like Uruk and smashed them into the world's first empire. You're about to see conquest, power, and a whole lot of swagger. So keep your ghostly head low, things are about to get intense. You're in Akkad's central square, where soldiers march past, their bronze spears glinting like the lapis lazuli you saw the markets. The mainstream historical fact is that Sargon of Akkad, around 2300 BCE, unified Mesopotamia's warring city-states into the first known empire, stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. You watch a herald proclaim Sargon's latest victory, his voice booming over the crowd. He's describing how Sargon crushed Lugal-Zezesi, a rival king, and dragged him through the streets in a neckstock. The crowd cheers, but you notice a few nervous glances. Conquest's thrilling, but it's also scary. You wander closer, catching sight of a massive statue of Sargon, his beard carved in perfect curls, like the art you admired. He's depicted trampling enemies, a not-so-subtle flex of power. Sargon's story is legendary. He started as a nobody, maybe a gardener's son, before seizing Akkad's throne and steamrolling his neighbors. You overhear a merchant muttering about Sargon's taxes, paid in grain or silver, recorded on those cuneiform tablets. Empire building's expensive, and everyone's feeling the pinch. You're tempted to ask the merchant if it's worth it, but his scowl says he's not in the mood.
Here's your quirky tidbit. Sargon's daughter, Enheduanna, was the world's first named author, writing hymns to Inanna that blended poetry and propaganda. You spot a temple nearby, where a priestess, maybe inspired by Enheduanna, chants a hymn, her voice carrying over the crowd. The words praise Sargon's victories, tying his rule to the gods you met. It's clever. Her poetry makes Sargon's conquests feel divinely approved. You're impressed, but you also catch a few locals rolling their eyes. Not everyone's buying the hype, and you can't blame them. You keep moving, drawn to a military camp at the city's edge. Soldiers are sharpening bronze blades, made from that tin and copper trade routes, while officers bark orders. Sargon's army is a machine, disciplined and terrifying, using chariots with those Sumerian wheels. You watch a drill, the soldiers moving like a single beast, and you're glad you're just a ghost. But conquest isn't just swords, it's strategy. Sargon standardized weights and measures, making trade across his empire smoother, and appointed loyal governors to keep city-states in line. You see a cuneiform tablet being sealed with a cylinder seal, maybe a governor's report, those wedges still tying everything together. The air's hot, carrying the scent of sweat and polished bronze. You overhear two soldiers debating whether Sargon's empire will last. One's loyal, praising Sargon's divine favor. The other's skeptical, muttering about rebellions in conquered cities like Uruk. Historians still argue whether Sargon's empire was a true centralized state or a loose collection of city-states held together by fear. You watch a caravan arrive, loaded with tribute from a distant city, and you're leaning toward fear. Those goods look like they were sent to avoid trouble, not out of love. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Sargon conquer so many cities? Because he wanted the biggest ziggurat in the neighborhood. You chuckle, but his ambition's no joke. You drift back to the square, where a scribe's teaching a boy to write Akkadian cuneiform, a shift from the Sumerian script you saw. Sargon spreading his language, blending Sumerian and Akkadian cultures into something new. You spot a tablet with Enheduanna's hymn, its wedges praising Inanna and, conveniently, her dad. It's propaganda, but it's beautiful, and you're starting to see how words can conquer as much as swords.
You pause by a canal, its water sluggish but vital, like those irrigation ditches. The empire's wealth depends on these fields, and Sargon's smart enough to keep them flowing. You see farmers hauling grain, probably taxes for the army, their faces tired but resigned. A woman nearby, maybe like the ones at Uruk, is weaving a basket, her hands quick despite the heat. She's part of this empire too, her work feeding the machine. You're struck by how everything, trade, writing, religion, even myths like Gilgamesh from section 11, is being woven into Sargon's vision. As the sun sets, casting an orange glow over Akkad, you linger by the statue. The city's buzzing, but there's tension under the surface. Soldiers, taxes, and the weight of an empire stretching too far, too fast. You see a priestess light an altar fire, her hymn echoing Enheduanna's words. It's a reminder that Sargon's rule isn't just about might, it's about convincing people he's chosen by the gods. You glance at the canal, its water catching the last light like a mirror. This empire's a fragile thing, built on conquest and clay, and you're right here, watching it rise. You're in Babylon now, around 1750 BCE, standing in a bustling plaza where the air smells of sun-warmed clay and the faint spice of incense drifting from a nearby temple. The Tigris glints in the distance, still a lifeline like Uruk, but the city around you feels grander than Uruk, with towering walls and a hum of confidence. You're here to unravel the legacy of Hammurabi, the king whose laws carved order into Mesopotamia's chaos. Those cuneiform tablets are about to take center stage, etched with rules that shaped justice and society. It's like stepping into an ancient courtroom, and you're about to see how Babylon played judge, jury, and executioner. You're drawn to a massive stone stele in the plaza, its surface covered in cuneiform wedges, gleaming under the midday sun. The mainstream historical fact is that Hammurabi's code, inscribed around 1754 BCE, is one of the earliest known legal systems, setting rules for everything from trade to marriage, with punishments that range from fair to downright brutal. You watch a crowd gather as a scribe reads from a clay tablet, summarizing the stele's laws. He's explaining a rule about theft. If you steal from a temple, you're in big trouble, like lose a hand trouble. The crowd murmurs, some nodding, others looking uneasy.
You're glad you're just a ghostly observer, not tempted to swipe anything.
You lean closer, catching the steel's top, where Hammurabi's carved standing before Shamash, the sun god. It's propaganda, like Enheduanna's hymns, showing the king as divinely approved. The laws are practical but harsh. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You overhear a merchant grumbling about a fine for short-changing a customer, clutching a tablet that's probably his contract. Those trade networks rely on these rules to keep deals honest, but the punishments make you wince. If you mess up a trade, you might pay with silver, or worse, your freedom. You're tempted to whisper, stick to bartering, but the merchant's too stressed to hear you. Here's your quirky tidbit. The code includes a law about tavern keepers, mostly women, who could face death for watering down beer. You spot a tavern nearby, where a woman, maybe like those brewers, is pouring frothy beer from a clay jar, her eyes sharp as she serves a customer. She's not messing around, and you respect the hustle. Nobody's diluting Ninkasi's sacred brew on her watch. The law's strict, but it shows how seriously Babylonians took their beer, a nod to that currency. You're half tempted to toast her, but you know, ghost problems. You keep moving, weaving through Babylon's streets, where the code's influence is everywhere. A man's arguing with a builder over a shoddy house. Another law says if a house collapses and kills someone, the builder's in deep trouble. The man's waving a cuneiform tablet, probably his contract, those wedges proving his case. The code's not just about punishment, it's about order, making sure trade, marriage, and even construction play by rules. But it's not equal. Nobles get lighter penalties than commoners, and you overhear a farmer muttering about unfair fines. Historians still argue whether the code was a true legal system or just a king's wish list to show off his power. Watching the farmer's frustration, you're leaning toward the latter. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Hammurabi write so many laws? Because he wanted to be the ruler of justice. You chuckle, but the code's no laughing matter. You drift toward a court-like building where a judge is settling a dispute between two landowners, both clutching tablets. The judge cites a law about irrigation ditches, those canals, and orders one to pay for flooding the other's field. It's orderly, almost modern, but the loser's face says he's not thrilled. The code's keeping Babylon stable, but it's also a reminder that justice here favors the powerful, just like in Sargon's empire. You pause by a market where a woman's selling pottery painted with patterns like those mosaics. She's chatting about a law protecting her right to trade, a small win for women. The code lets some women own property or run businesses, but only if they're widows or priestesses. You see her seal a deal with a cylinder seal. Its design, a lion maybe, pressed into clay. It's a tiny act of power, and you're rooting for her, even if the system's stacked against most. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river reeds and roasting barley, tying you back to Uruk's markets. You wander toward the Tigris, its water reflecting the setting sun like a polished bronze mirror. The code's reach extends here too. Laws regulate fishing rights and boat trade, keeping the river's bounty in check. You spot a fisherman hauling a net, muttering about a fine for catching too many fish. He's got a tablet tucked in his belt, maybe proof of his quota. Those cuneiform wedges are everywhere, making Babylon's laws as real as the ziggurats or myths. You're struck by how the code's trying to tame a chaotic world, much like those rivers you saw. As dusk settles, you linger by the stele, its wedges now shadowy in the fading light. The plaza's quieter, but the code's presence lingers. On tablets, in arguments, in the order of the city. You see a scribe teaching a boy to copy a law, his stylus wobbling but determined. It's a small moment, but it's huge. This code will outlive Hammurabi.
etched into history like Gilgamesh's epic. You feel the weight of a city trying to balance fairness and power, and you're right here, watching it unfold under Babylon's starry sky. You're now in Nineveh, around 700 BCE, standing in a sprawling city where the air carries the sharp tang of polished bronze and the distant roar of a crowd. The Tigris flows nearby, still a moody lifeline-like, but the vibe here is different, grander, fiercer, like the whole city's flexing its muscles. You're diving into the Assyrian Empire, Mesopotamia's military juggernaut, where conquest isn't just a hobby, it's an art form. Those cuneiform tablets and the trade networks are still humming, but now they're fueling an empire that thrives on fear and precision. Keep your ghostly head down, things are about to get intense.
You're in the heart of Nineveh, near a massive palace where soldiers strut past, their armor clanking like a warning. The mainstream historical fact is that the Assyrians, peaking around 911 to 609 BCE, built a military empire unmatched in its time, using advanced tactics and sheer brutality to dominate Mesopotamia and beyond. You watch a parade of troops, their spears gleaming, led by a commander who looks like he could bench press a chariot. They're fresh from a campaign, maybe against Egypt or Elam, and the crowd's cheering, tossing flowers but keeping their distance. You can feel the tension. Assyrian might is a double-edged sword, even for its own people. You wander closer to the palace, its walls carved with reliefs. Think the art, but meaner, showing kings like Ashurnasirpal II hunting lions or trampling enemies. The carvings are propaganda, screaming, "Don't mess with us." You overhear a scribe reading a cuneiform tablet, boasting about 3,000 prisoners taken in a single battle. The numbers are staggering, and you're glad you're not on the receiving end. The Assyrians used terror as a weapon, impaling rebels, burning cities, to keep their empire in line. You're tempted to whisper, "Chill, guys," but the soldiers' glares say they're not in the mood for ghostly sarcasm. Here's your QWERTY tidbit. Assyrians kept detailed war diaries on clay tablets, recording everything from troop movements to the number of heads, yes, heads, taken in battle. You spot a scribe in a corner, scratching wedges into a tablet, maybe logging the latest conquest. It's grim, but it shows their obsession with precision, like the math nerds. Those diaries helped plan campaigns and brag to the gods, like Shamash's stele. You glance at the tablet, its wedges cold and clinical, and you're struck by how war's as bureaucratic as trade or law in this world. You keep moving, drawn to a military camp outside the city. Chariots, souped-up versions of those Sumerian wheels, roll by, pulled by horses that snort like they know they're the real MVPs. The Assyrians were masters of siege warfare, using battering rams and mobile towers to crack city walls. You watch engineers test a ram, its bronze tip gleaming like a bad omen. They're not just fighting, they're innovating, turning war into a science. But it's not all glory. You overhear two soldiers muttering about a failed siege, one nursing a bandaged arm. Historians still argue whether Assyrian brutality strengthened their empire or sowed the seeds of its collapse by fueling rebellions. Watching the soldiers' grim faces, you're betting on the latter.
Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Assyrian soldier join the army? He wanted to be a cut above the rest. You chuckle, but the reality is brutal. You drift back to the palace where a feast is underway, probably celebrating a victory. Nobles raise clay cups of beer, Ninkassi's legacy, while musicians play lyres. The kings there may be Sennacherib, surrounded by advisors clutching cuneiform tablets. They're planning the next campaign, using trade wealth to fund it. You notice a woman offering a prayer to Ashur, the war god,
Religion's still the glue here, justifying every spear thrust. You wander through Nineveh's streets, passing a market where traders sell looted goods, gold from Egypt, cedar from Lebanon like the halls. The empire's wealth is staggering, but it's built on blood. You see a family repairing a house, their mud brick walls patched. They're muttering about taxes, paid to keep the army marching. Those irrigation canals are still feeding the fields, but now they're fueling an empire's hunger for conquest. You spot a cuneiform tablet by a stall, maybe a tax record, its wedges tying daily life to the war machine. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river reeds and smouldering incense. You pause by a temple where a priest burns offerings, the smoke curling toward the sky. The Assyrians believed their gods demanded victory, and every battle was a divine test. You see a cylinder seal pressed into clay, showing a warrior god. It's art, faith, and power rolled into one. You're struck by how everything here, war, trade, religion, is interconnected, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, but with more bloodshed. You're tempted to ask the priest if Asher ever takes a day off, but his focus says it's not the time. As the sun dips, casting an orange glow over Nineveh, you linger by the palace walls. The reliefs glow in the fading light, their scenes of conquest both beautiful and chilling. The city's buzzing, but there's an edge, soldiers, taxes, and the constant threat of rebellion. You feel the weight of an empire that rules by fear, its glory built on clay and blood. The Tigris reflects the last light, a reminder of the rivers that started it all. You're right here, watching Assyria's might at its peak, knowing it can't last forever. You're in Babylon again, around 600 BCE, standing in a city that feels like it's showing off. The air's thick with the scent of blooming gardens and the faint tang of polished stone, and the Euphrates glints nearby, still a lifeline like. The Assyrian war machine from last time is gone, toppled by rebels, and now Babylon's back on top, gleaming under King Nebuchadnezzar II. You're here to explore the Neo-Babylonian Empire's splendor, where wonders like the Hanging Gardens and massive walls make this city a legend. It's like walking into a postcard from the ancient world, but with more dust and divine swagger. Let's dive in. You start at the Ishtar Gate, its blue-glazed bricks shimmering under the sun, adorned with golden lions and dragons, art that rivals the ziggurats. The mainstream historical fact is that Nebuchadnezzar II, ruling from 605 to 562 BCE, transformed Babylon into a cultural and architectural marvel, possibly building the Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. You watch a crowd pass through the gate, their eyes wide at its grandeur. Merchants, priests, even foreign envoys gawk, and you can't blame them. This place screams power. You're tempted to run your hand over the glazed tiles, but you know ghost rules. You wander toward the rumored site of the Hanging Gardens, though nobody's sure they even existed. Picture terraces cascading with greenery, vines, figs, maybe roses, irrigated by clever pumps pulling water from the Euphrates, those canals working overtime. You see workers tending plants, their hands stained with soil, and you can almost smell the flowers. Legend says Nebuchadnezzar built this for his wife Amytis, to remind her of her mountainous homeland. Romantic, right? But historians still argue whether the gardens were real or just a poetic exaggeration, maybe even built in Nineveh instead. You squint at the terraces, half convinced they're real, half wondering if it's ancient hype. Here's your quirky tidbit. Babylonians used asphalt, a sticky black goo from natural pits, to waterproof their gardens and buildings. You spot workers smearing it on a canal wall, their hands black and shiny. It's not glamorous, but it's genius, keeping water where it belongs, just like those irrigation systems. You overhear one worker joking about the smell, and you grin. It's like ancient road tar, and nobody's thrilled to be near it. This practical trick helped Babylon's gardens and walls last, making the city a fortress of beauty and brains.
You keep moving, drawn to Babylon's massive walls, so thick you could drive a chariot on them, those wheels still rolling. The walls stretch for miles, a testament to Nebuchadnezzar's paranoia and pride after the Assyrian collapse. You watch soldiers patrol, their bronze helmets glinting. They're not as terrifying as Assyrian troops, but they're ready for trouble. A scribe nearby scratches a cuneiform tablet, maybe recording wall repairs, those wedges from Section 5 tying Babylon's splendor to its bureaucracy. You're struck by how everything here, gardens, walls, gates, is built on the same systems you saw in Uruk, just bigger and flashier. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river reeds and blooming jasmine. You pause by a temple where priests offer incense to Marduk, Babylon's top god, who's taken Inanna's spotlight. The temple's ziggurat towers over the city, its peak catching the sun like a divine spotlight. You see a priestess, maybe like those reading a tablet with a hymn, her voice soft but commanding. Religion's still the glue here, justifying Nebuchadnezzar's rule like Hammurabi's code. You're tempted to ask her if Marduk approves of the gardens, but her focus says she's not chatting with ghosts today. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Nebuchadnezzar build such big walls? Because he wanted to keep the party and the enemies out. You chuckle, but the walls are serious business. You drift through the city, passing markets buzzing with goods, lapis lazuli, cedar like in the trade routes. A woman selling pottery painted with floral designs, maybe inspired by those gardens. She seals a deal with a cylinder seal, its pattern a miniature Ishtar gate. Women here are still hustling, running stalls or managing households, their work woven into Babylon's shine. You wander toward the Euphrates, where boats unload grain feeding the city's wealth. Those trade networks are thriving, and Babylon's the hub, pulling in riches from Egypt to Persia. You see a merchant arguing over a tablet, probably a contract, his voice sharp. The code's legacy from Uruk lingers, keeping trade fair, but firm. You spot a kid nearby, drawing in the dust, mimicking the gate's lion motifs. It's cute, and it reminds you of the kids carrying on traditions. Babylon's not just a city, it's a culture, built on the backs of farmers, traders, and dreamers. As the sun dips, casting a golden glow over the Ishtar gate, you linger by the river. The gardens, if they're real, rustle in the breeze, their scent mixing with the water's earthy tang. The city's alive, its walls and ziggurats shouting Nebuchadnezzar's glory. You feel the weight of a place that's both a peak and a target. Assyria fell, and Babylon's not immune. Those cuneiform tablets, those canals, those myths, they're all here, dressed up in blue tiles and greenery. You're right here, watching a city at its zenith, knowing it's as fragile as it is dazzling. You're still in Babylon, around 600 BCE, standing on a dusty plain just outside the city's towering walls, where the air smells of sweat, leather, and the metallic tang of sharpened bronze. The Euphrates glints in the distance, a familiar lifeline. But today your focus is on the clash of armies, not the flow of trade or the splendor of the Ishtar gate. You're diving into how Mesopotamians, especially the Neo-Babylonians and their Assyrian predecessors, turned warfare into a science, evolving tactics and tools that made their armies feared across the ancient world. It's gritty, loud, and a little terrifying, so keep your ghostly head low as you step into the battlefield. You're near a training ground where soldiers drill, their shouts mixing with the clatter of chariots, those wheels now tricked out for war. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamian warfare evolved dramatically,
with Assyrians and Babylonians pioneering advanced tactics like siege engines, cavalry, and psychological terror, building on the Akkadian conquests. You watch a squad practice with a battering ram, its bronze-capped tip slamming into a practice wall with a thud that shakes the ground. These guys aren't just fighting, they're engineering victory, and you're glad you're not on the other side of that ram. You wander closer, noticing the soldiers' armor, leather reinforced with bronze scales, gleaming like the trade goods. Their commanders barking orders, directing archers to fire at straw targets. The bows are composite, made of wood and horn, a step up from earlier designs, and the arrows fly with deadly precision. You overhear a soldier boast about a siege where they starved a city into submission, a tactic the Assyrians perfected. It's brutal, and you're tempted to whisper, maybe try diplomacy, but the glint in his eye says he's all in on war. The Babylonians learned from their predecessors, and they're not messing around.
Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamian armies sometimes used war dogs, trained to attack enemies or guard camps, decked out with spiked collars like ancient canine units. You spot a handler nearby, calming a massive dog with a pat, its collar studded with bronze. The dog's growling at a passing recruit, and you can't help but grin. It's like a furry soldier, ready to take a bite out of trouble. These dogs were as much a part of the war machine as the chariots, and you're glad you're invisible, because that mutt looks like it means business. You keep moving, drawn to a siege tower under construction, its wooden frame towering like a proto-ziggurat. Engineers, using math skills, are measuring ropes to hoist it. Their cuneiform tablets nearby, maybe detailing supplies. Those wedges are still everywhere, tracking weapons, rations, and battle plans. You overhear two officers arguing about a recent campaign, one blaming a loss on bad omens, the other on poor scouting. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamian warfare relied more on strategy or divine favor. Did they win with tactics or prayers to gods like Marduk? Watching the officers' heated debate, you're betting on a mix of both. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Babylonian soldier bring a ladder to battle? Because he wanted to take the fight to the next level. You chuckle, but the reality's grim. You drift toward a camp where soldiers are polishing swords, their blades forged from bronze and later iron thanks to those trade routes. The camp's buzzing with activity, blacksmiths hammering, scribes recording, even a priestess like those praying for victory. War's a team effort, and Babylon's got it down to a science, from supply chains to divine blessings. You spot a cylinder seal on a tablet, maybe marking a general's orders, its design a warrior like the ones in reliefs. You wander back toward the city, passing fields fed by those irrigation canals. The grain here fuels the army, just like it fueled Sargon's empire. You see farmers hauling barley, their faces tired, knowing their crops are taxes for war. A woman nearby, maybe like those, is weaving a soldier's cloak, her hands quick despite the heat. War touches everyone, from the battlefield to the home front. You're struck by how interconnected it all is. Trade, religion, even the Epic of Gilgamesh, with its tales of heroic fights, inspires these soldiers to see themselves as legends.
The air's hot, carrying the scent of dust and oiled leather. You pause by the Euphrates, where boats unload weapons, their crews muttering about a coming campaign. Those trade networks keep the army armed, but the river's also a highway for war, carrying troops to distant battles. You see a cuneiform tablet tossed in the dirt, maybe a casualty list, its wedges stark. War's not just glory, it's loss, and you feel the weight of it. You're tempted to ask a passing soldier if it's worth it, but his grim face says he's got enough on his mind. As the sun sets, casting a red glow over the training ground, you linger by the siege tower. The soldiers are quieter now,
sharpening blades or praying under their breath. Babylon's at its peak, its walls and gardens a testament to its power, but war's the engine driving it. You feel the tension. An empire built on conquest, like Assyria before it, is always one battle from cracking. The river reflects the fading light, a reminder of the Tigris and Euphrates that started it all. You're right here, watching Mesopotamia's war machine roar, knowing its victories come at a cost. You're still in Babylon, around 539 BCE, standing on a crumbling wall, overlooking a city that's starting to feel the weight of time. The Euphrates flows nearby, its waters quieter now, but still vital, echoing those canals. The Ishtar Gate's blue tiles glint in the distance, but the air's heavy with dust and the faint scent of decay, like a festival that's gone on too long. You're here to witness the fall of Mesopotamia's mighty empires, Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and now Babylon, each collapsing under the strain of war, rebellion, and ambition. It's a slow-motion tragedy, and you're about to see how the giants of the ancient world came crashing down. You start in Babylon's streets, where the buzz of Nebuchadnezzar's glory days feels faded. The mainstream historical fact is that the Neo-Babylonian Empire fell to the Persian king Cyrus the Great in 539 BCE, marking the end of Mesopotamia's dominance as foreign powers took over. You watch merchants haggle half-heartedly in the market, their stalls thinner. A soldier patrols nearby, his bronze spear, forged from trade goods, looking more ceremonial than threatening. Rumors of Persian armies are spreading, and you overhear a scribe muttering about Cyrus's approach. The city's nervous, and you can feel it, like static before a storm. You wander toward the palace, its walls still grand but patched, like the houses in Section 6. Inside, King Nabonidus is absent, off praying to the moon god Sin instead of rallying troops. You see advisors clutching cuneiform tablets, those wedges now recording desperate plans. Babylon's wealth, built on trade and conquest, has made it a target. You spot a broken tablet in the dust, maybe a tax record or a plea to Marduk. The empire's cracking, and you're tempted to whisper, "Get it together!" But nobody's listening to ghosts when Persians are knocking. Here's your quirky tidbit. Babylonians believed a city's fall could be caused by divine anger, and priests would perform rituals to appease gods before battles. You see a priestess burning incense at a temple, her face tense as she prays for Marduk to save Babylon. She's scattering barley, think the offerings, hoping to change the gods' minds. It's a long shot, and you're skeptical, but it's a reminder of how myths shaped even the endgame. The crowd around her is sparse, their faith wavering as Persian campfires glow on the horizon. You glance at the ziggurat, its peak dim in the haze, and wonder if Marduk's checked out too. You keep moving, drawn to the city walls, those massive barriers, now manned by jittery guards. The Euphrates, diverted by Cyrus's engineers, is running low, a trick to let his army slip under the walls. You watch soldiers scramble, their siege tactics no match for Persian cunning. Babylon's not alone in falling. Sumer's city-states crumbled to Akkad, Akkad to rebels, Assyria to Babylon. Each empire thought it was eternal, but ambition and enemies proved otherwise. Historians still argue whether internal decay, like Nabonidus's neglect, or external pressure, like Cyrus's army, doomed these empires. Watching the guards panic, you're betting on both. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Babylon's walls fail? Because they couldn't keep out Cyrus' curiosity. You chuckle, but the mood's grim. You drift back to the market, where a woman's selling pottery, her designs simpler than the floral jars. She's muttering about fleeing to the countryside,
her hands shaking as she seals a deal with the cylinder seal. Trade slowing and fears creeping in. You see a kid nearby drawing in the dirt, maybe mimicking the lions on the Ishtar gate. It's a flicker of normalcy, but it's fleeting. Babylon's days are numbered.
You pause by the Euphrates, its water barely a trickle now, exposing muddy banks. Those irrigation canals, once the city's lifeline, are useless if the river's diverted. You spot a fisherman, his net empty, cursing the gods. He's clutching an amulet, maybe to fend off those Utuku spirits, but no charm can stop Cyrus. The city's wealth, from trade routes, made it a prize, but also a target. You see a cuneiform tablet tossed aside, its wedges spelling out a trade contract that's now worthless. The systems that built Babylon, writing, trade, war, are crumbling with it. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river mud and fading incense. You wander toward the temple, where the priestess is still praying, her voice softer now, almost resigned. The ziggurat wombs, a shadow of its former glory, like the epic of Gilgamesh, a story of mortality that feels all too real. Babylon's fall isn't just about armies, it's about a world shifting, where new powers, Persians, then Greeks, will reshape Mesopotamia. You're tempted to ask the priestess if she sees it coming, but her eyes are fixed on the altar, searching for hope. As night falls, the city's quiet, the usual buzz replaced by whispers of fear. You linger by the Ishtar gate, its blue tiles dim under the stars. The empire's fading, its walls no match for time or ambition. You feel the weight of centuries, Sumer's farmers, Sargon's conquests, Hammurabi's laws, Assyria's terror, all leading to this moment. The Euphrates reflects the moonlight, a faint echo of the rivers that birthed it all. You're right here, watching Babylon's final act, knowing its story will outlive its walls, carved in clay and memory. You start in a Persian administrative center, maybe Susa, where scribes scribble on clay tablets, their cuneiform wedges tracking taxes for the Achaemenid Empire. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamia's innovations, like writing, urban planning, and legal systems, spread through trade, conquest, and cultural exchange, influencing Persia, Greece, and even Rome. You watch a Persian official, his robe embroidered with gold, review a tablet that looks like it could have come from Hammurabi's Babylon. The wedges are Akkadian, not Persian, proof that Mesopotamia's writing system outlived its empires, becoming the ancient world's spreadsheet. You wander closer, noticing the official seal, a winged lion, echoing the art. Persia adopted Mesopotamia's cylinder seals, using them to authenticate documents across their vast empire. You overhear a Greek merchant, maybe from Athens, haggling nearby, his ship loaded with wine. He's here because of those trade routes, which still hum, connecting east to west. Mesopotamia's markets taught the world how to trade, barley, lapis, even ideas, and you can feel the pulse of that legacy. You're tempted to ask the Greek if he knows his alphabet's roots trace back to cuneiform's cousins, but he's too busy arguing over prices. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamian myths, like the flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, found echoes in later tales, including the Bible's Noah's Ark. You spot a storyteller in a corner, regaling a crowd with a tale of a great flood sent by gods, sounding eerily familiar. His audience, a mix of Persians and locals, nods, captivated. Myths like these traveled with traders and captives, seeping into Hebrew, Greek, and even Indian stories. You glance at a clay tablet nearby, maybe inscribed with a myth, its wedges carrying stories that outlasted Babylon's walls. It's wild to think a tale from Uruk's dusty streets could shape scriptures centuries later. You keep moving, drifting toward a library. Think Nineveh's war diaries, where scribes copy Mesopotamian texts on astronomy and math, those brainy feats. The Persians are eating it up. using Babylonian star charts to navigate and plan. You see a scribe teaching a young boy to calculate using base 60, the system that gave you 360-degree circles and 60-minute hours. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras, maybe inspired by these ideas through trade, will later build on them. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia's math directly shaped Greek science, or if it was just a shared vibe across cultures. Watching the boy's stylus wobble, you're betting on direct influence. Those wedges are too precise to be a coincidence.
Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Mesopotamia's ideas spread so far? Because they had the wheel deal. You chuckle, thinking of those Sumerian wheels rolling goods and ideas across borders. You drift to a marketplace where a woman sells pottery with floral designs like those in Babylon. She's Persian, but her style screams Mesopotamia, proof that art styles traveled too. Women weaving and trading carried cultural threads forward, their work shaping markets from Susa to Athens. You see her seal a deal with a cylinder seal, its design a nod to Inanna. It's a small act, but it's history in motion. You pause by a canal, its water reflecting the midday sun, a quieter echo of those irrigation systems. These canals, now feeding Persian fields, were Mesopotamia's gift to agriculture, copied across empires. You spot a farmer checking a sluice gate, his methods straight out of Uruk's playbook. Nearby, a cuneiform tablet lies in the dust, maybe a record of grain yields. Those wedges tied Mesopotamia together, trade, laws, myths, and now they're tying the ancient world to the future. You're struck by how ideas, not just armies, conquer time, spreading like ripples from a river. The air's warm, carrying the scent of river reeds and baked clay. You wander toward a temple where a priest offers barley to a god, maybe Marduk's successor, now Persianized. Religion still shapes daily life, but Mesopotamia's gods have new names, their stories blending with Persian and Greek myths. You see a kid nearby drawing in the dirt, mimicking the lion motifs from Babylon's gates. It's a flicker of continuity, like the kids carrying culture forward. You're tempted to pat him on the head, but ghosts don't do that, and he's too focused anyway. As the sun dips, casting golden light over the canal, you linger, feeling the weight of Mesopotamia's reach. From wheels to laws, myths to math, this land's ideas seeded the world, outliving the empires that birthed them. You see a scribe packing away his tablets, their wedges holding secrets that'll shape Rome, Byzantium, even your own time. The river reflects the fading light, a reminder of the Tigris and Euphrates that started it all. You're right here, watching Mesopotamia's legacy flow outward, a current that never stops.
You're floating above Mesopotamia, around 500 BCE. The Tigris and Euphrates winding below like silver threads in a tapestry of fields and ruins. The air carries the faint scent of river mud and wild herbs, a nod to those first farmers you met. Babylon's walls are now Persian property, and the ziggurats, trade routes and cuneiform tablets you've seen are fading into history's shadow. You're here to reflect on Mesopotamia's lasting gifts, its wheels, laws, stories, and ideas that still ripple through your world. This is the grand finale, a slow fade into the legacy of a land that started it all. So let's linger and let the story settle like dust after a long journey. Where farmers still tend fields fed by those ancient canals. The mainstream historical fact is that Mesopotamia's innovations, writing, urban planning, mathematics and law, became the foundation for modern civilization, shaping everything from government to science. You watch a farmer check a sluice gate, his methods echoing the Sumerians who tamed the rivers millennia ago. His fields are green with barley, a crop that fed Uruk's markets and Babylon's armies. You're struck by the continuity.
Mesopotamia's roots run deep, even under Persian rule. You drift closer, noticing a scribe in the village square teaching a boy to scratch wedges into clay. Those cuneiform marks, once used for Hammurabi's code or Gilgamesh's epic, are now recording Persian taxes. Writing's the gift that keeps giving, letting ideas travel beyond lifetimes. You see a broken tablet in the dirt, its wedges faded but still legible, a whisper of Uruk's scribes or Babylon's laws. It's like finding a letter from history, and you're tempted to cradle it, but ghosts don't get to keep souvenirs. Instead, you marvel at how these scratches shaped alphabets, books, even the screen you're watching this on. Here's your quirky tidbit. Mesopotamians invented the concept of zero as a placeholder, a math trick that's still in your bank account's balance, or lack thereof. You overhear a merchant nearby using a counting board to tally grain, his fingers flicking beads in a way that feels oddly modern. That base 60 system, dividing hours into minutes and circles into degrees, is Mesopotamia's quiet gift to your clock and compass. You grin, imagining a Sumerian scribe bragging, "Told you it'd catch on." Their math didn't just measure fields, it mapped the stars, built cities, and gave the world a way to count time.
You keep moving, floating over a market where traders barter goods, wool, copper, spices. A woman, maybe a descendant of those brewers, sells beer, her jars sealed with a cylinder seal. The design's a lion, a nod to Babylon's Ishtar Gate. Trade, art, even that beer recipe for Ninkasi, they've outlasted empires, carried by merchants to Persia, Greece and beyond, as you saw. You overhear two traders arguing, one waving a clay tablet. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia's influence spread more through conquest, like Sargon, or trade's softer touch. Watching the markets buzz, you're betting on trade. Ideas travel faster than armies. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why is Mesopotamia's legacy so big? Because it had a really good start. You chuckle, thinking of those clunky wheels, rolling goods and ideas across centuries. You drift toward a temple, where a priest offers barley to a god, maybe Marduk's heir. The myths you heard, from Inanna's schemes to Gilgamesh's grief, still linger in stories told across cultures, from the Bible to Greek epics. You see a kid nearby, drawing a bull in the dust, mimicking the art. It's a small act, but it's Mesopotamia's spirit, creative, stubborn, eternal. The air's cooling now, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows over the fields. You pause by the Euphrates, its water reflecting the fading light, like a memory of every canal, every flood, every prayer you've seen. Those farmers, the scribes, the women, they're all part of this legacy, their work woven into the world's fabric. You feel the weight of it, a civilization that invented cities, laws and stories, only to fall, as you saw. The river's quiet hum carries the scent of reeds and earth, and you're right here, watching history breathe.
As the sky turns orange, you drift higher, the village shrinking below, its mud brick houses blending into the dusk. Mesopotamia's story is settling into your bones, a tale of human grit and genius that started with those first seeds. The rivers still flow, carrying silt and stories, but the empires, Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, Babylon, are gone, their ziggurats crumbling under time's gentle hand. You think of Gilgamesh, chasing immortality, and realize Mesopotamia found it, not in walls or kings, but in ideas, writing, math, law, myth, still alive in your world. The stars begin to peek out, soft pinpricks in the violet sky, reminding you of the astronomers charting the heavens on clay.
Those cuneiform tablets, those wheels, those laws, they've traveled further than any empire, shaping how you measure time, build cities, tell stories. You see a faint glow from the village, a clay lamp flickering in a window like the priestess's offerings. It's a quiet reminder of faith, work, and dreams carried across millennia. You feel a breeze, cool and slow, whispering through the reeds. The world below is ancient, yet familiar. Farmers, traders, scribes, all striving for something lasting. You think of the women brewing beer and weaving cloth, or the soldiers marching to glory and ruin. Their lives, their stories, echo in your own. Every contract you sign, every star you wish upon, every tale you tell. Mesopotamia is not just a place, it's the root of it all, a gift wrapped in clay and carried by rivers. The night deepens, the air soft with the hum of insects and the distant ripple of water. You're floating, weightless, as the village fades into darkness, its people dreaming under the same stars their ancestors mapped. You feel a gentle pull, like the current of the Euphrates, carrying you towards sleep. Mesopotamia's legacy lingers in the quiet. Numbers, words, laws, myths, whispering through time, lulling you into a world where history feels like home.